Hello and welcome to another virtual learning webinar from Nufarm. My name is Aaron Hathaway. I'm a technical services manager with Nufarm. Today I want to talk about a question: why use a premium herbicide? So we're going to hopefully kind of go through the story of herbicides at least a little while back and talk about how they've changed and why they've changed. As you look through Nufarm's portfolio of herbicides, the question, why would I choose one of these herbicides over another, is easy for some, and it's more difficult when you compare others. So herbicides like Manor and Certainty, those are more warm season herbicides. In fact, Certainty has no cool season grasses on the label. Horsepower and Cool Power, those two products have the exact same active ingredients, but Cool Power is more of an ester-based formulation, and so you'd be more apt to use it real early spring before maybe ornamentals are producing any new growth that might be sensitive. And Horsepower's more an amine formulation that you'd be able to use kind of year-round when you don't have to worry too much about volatility with a formulation like that. Change Up has a lot of options in warm season grasses. Sure Power is a product that you would apply in the summer, especially when you want kind of a hammer, something that's good on really difficult to control weeds, but you're going to use it in the middle of the summer. Quincept would be a product that has quinclorac, and if you have any crabgrass, that might be a product you choose. Cue Ball similarly. And so some of these, it's easy to figure out why you might use it over others. Solero is a nut sedge product, and Kalinga. So some of it's easy, but I want to talk about when it becomes difficult to kind of tease apart the differences between these herbicides and why you'd use one of these premium herbicides over something like triplet. So premium herbicides, and we'll talk about what exactly a premium herbicide is, but the message I want to get across today is that they can provide control of difficult to control weeds when maybe a herbicide that's not a premium herbicide, a three-way herbicide, would not. They can provide control when weed growth is limited, and I'll talk about why weed growth is important as you apply a herbicide. They can provide control when the season isn't ideal for proper uptake. They can provide faster control, so if visual death of a weed is important to you, which often is to clients who want to see the results from what you just did or what they just paid for, it can do that. These premium herbicides can do that, and they can reduce the need for repeat applications. So when we, a while ago, you can see this date, the date on here from 98 to 2000, me and a colleague used to take surveys from everybody we would speak to and ask them, what's your most difficult to control weed? Wild violets was always at the top of that list, and ground ivy was always nearing the top of that list. You can also see nut sedge, yellow nut sedge, crabgrass, some annuals even, prostrate spurge, white clover, some grasses as well like quackgrass. And so we used to, when I was teaching weed management classes, I used to break up weeds into these management categories. And so two of those categories were easy to control broadleaf weeds and difficult to control broadleaf weeds. And how I differentiated those two categories was pretty easy. Easy to control broadleaf weeds were those that were controlled by a three-way herbicide, something like triplet. These three-way herbicides, every company makes their version, and they always contain the same three active ingredients for the most part. And those are 2,4-D, MCPP or Mecoprop, and dicamba. Those three herbicides put together really have a broad spectrum of broadleaf weed control. They're very safe on most grass species, and so they've also been around for the longest period of time. 2,4-D is the herbicide that has the most history. It's the first selective herbicide. It selectively removes broadleaves from grasses. And so those three active ingredients have been around for a really long time. They've been in combination in products for a really long time. It's a product that we don't consider premium anymore because they're the cheapest active ingredients to formulate with. And it's a product that especially lawn care operators, have been using for the longest period of time. They're comfortable with them. They've been spraying them. They know they do well controlling a broad spectrum of weeds. And so over time, we've kind of selected for these difficult to control broadleaves on our own. The ones that you saw on that list in the last slide or 2 slides ago, wild violet, ground ivy, those two in particular, 240, MCPP, and dicamba aren't going to do a good job controlling those 2 weeds in particular and other difficult to control broadleaf weeds if you don't put another active ingredient with it. So now we've developed this difficult to control broadleaf weeds, and we've kind of categorized those on our own as we've used one herbicide over and over and over again. We found out which weeds really aren't well controlled by that particular herbicide. And so difficult to control broadleaf weeds are better controlled by herbicides that contain clopyralid, fluroxapyr, triclopyr, or quinclorac, and there could be other active ingredients that I'll talk about later too that would be in these mixes. But you notice that PYR in a lot of these: clopyralid, fluroxapyr, triclopyr. Those, you probably recognize those active ingredients, but remember that PYR. Those are pyridines. They're a little bit different chemistry than phenoxys and benzoics. So dicamba is a benzoic, and 2,4-D and mecoprop, those are phenoxys. And so this difference in chemistry can make all the difference in how well it's going to control some of these difficult to control broadleaf weeds. So you have to choose the proper active ingredient. Improving application timing is important if you want to get great control of difficult to control broadleaf weeds. Making repeat applications can be important. Use a surfactant. Sometimes this is key, especially when they're very mature and have a thick cuticle. And then make sure you're getting good coverage. And sometimes there's a weird thing going on. Maybe you have hard water and it needs to be buffered with something like AMS. So think about all of these things. So this is wild violet. Notice how those leaves kind of stand up. And so think about you spraying and a droplet kind of swirls around that leaf and just falls right off as those vertical leaves stand up. It's kind of a marble raceway for those droplets. Ground ivy, just like wild violet, ground ivy is a perennial and it has plenty of storage sites for sugars, for carbohydrates. So you can burn down the foliage often, but all these stolons in something like ground ivy, if one little piece is left somewhere, it can kind of provide enough energy for that plant to just get going again and take over the area. Speedwell's another. And so I just talked about those 3 difficult to control broadleaf weeds. And I want to set up this graph because it kind of tells the story of how these different active ingredients work or don't work as you try to control a difficult to control broadleaf weed like ground ivy. And so you see that quinclorac is here. We either tank mixed quinclorac with these other products that are on the left, and minus means we did not add quinclorac to the tank, and plus means we did add quinclorac to the tank. And then you see over on this left side we have different active ingredients that we put together and then sprayed on ground ivy. This is 56 days after control. This was a summer application, June 10th. Not a great timing, and I'll talk briefly about why it's not a great timing. In the spring or early summer like that, we have most or all of our growth is above ground. Those plants are working hard to get foliage so that foliage can start photosynthesizing and just producing more foliage so that plant can mature. And so these herbicides move with those sugars. So if sugars are moving above the ground with this new growth, that's where the herbicide's moving. And so this is when you can see lots of fireworks, lots of death and mayhem and all the stuff that people like to see. However, it's all above ground and there's not much going on below ground where there's a big dandelion taproot or there's stolons where all these sugars are stored, or these herbicides need to be translocated to these different sites. And so this isn't a great timing. And so one of the things I mentioned is improve your timing. Fall is a much better timing. October 4th, if you want to say goodbye to your weeds, say 10-4, good buddy. That's a much better timing because plants are getting ready for the winter. They're storing those sugars, not above ground, but below ground in their vegetative sites, especially plants like dandelion that have that big taproot. They're storing all those sugars down there. Wild violet, ground ivy is storing their sugars in their stolons, preparing for the winter. So that's a better timing because then the herbicide's going to move with those sugars into those vegetative sites so it can't just push up new foliage, not as easily anyway. So back to this graph. That was kind of an aside, but you can see there's products. We have our typical three-way here, 2,4-D, MCPP, and dicamba. We have a product that's just triclopyr, and then we have products, one that has 2,4-D, triclopyr, and clopyralid. One has 2,4-D, triclopyr, and dicamba. So you see some of those pyridines in there, which I said are really important to have in the mix if you're trying to control weeds. Difficult to control weeds, but you see triclopyr on its own did a great job. With or without quinclorac in the mix. And also that three-way, it did an okay job with or without quinclorac, but not as well as some of our premium herbicides. And then you add triclopyr and clopyralid in there, you get much better control, similar to triclopyr. And then you also see right here where we added quinclorac to just 2,4-D alone, that mix can be awesome. Just very synergistic mix, which means if you get a control value of 1 for 2,4-D and a control value of 1 for quinclorac, when you add them together, you get better control than just adding those values together. It's more like a value of 3. And so you get synergistic control. So this just to show how these different active ingredients can provide better control just because they have more specific control of some of these difficult to control weeds. And then I added a layer in here. So we still have that with and without quinclorac in this tank mix. This is a different trial in a different year. And we also have repeat applications. So these two columns, all these treatments were repeat applied a second time 28 days later, or we can just look at the single applied applications. And you can see this year was worse. We didn't have as good of control even in the other year. And so this is another June timed application. You can see that three-way applied just once barely gave us any control. Even triclopyr plus clopyralid, we had to add quinclorac to get better control. And then anytime we added triclopyr or clopyralid or both and added quinclorac, we had a little better control. And then again, 2,4-D plus quinclorac helped. But anytime we could make a repeat application with quinclorac especially, or even some of these repeat applications without quinclorac, it gave us much better control. And so again, those active ingredients, this is a poorly timed application in that spring timing. We're not expecting great control here, but if we're going to make the app, we want to choose our active ingredients well to make sure we get the most out of it. And further, if we're not going to come back and make a repeat application, we can see that we lose all our control altogether eventually. Because if we only controlled 50% of that weed, the other 50% is going to proliferate and reproduce some of those plants that we caused to die or to shrink back. So this is a mnemonic device just to try to get you to remember to look for a herbicide with these premium active ingredients. And so if you went to a yard and it hadn't been taken care of, no herbicide was sprayed for a long time, and you saw just a broad spectrum of weeds, it might be a good idea just to spray a three-way product twice, just to clean it up real well. And so T3 means try a three-way twice, try triplet twice, try one of those products that's been around for a long time that we don't consider a premium product twice. And then if there are weeds left over, that might indicate to you that those are difficult to control weeds, like we talked about, and you want a T4. This time try triclopyr. It doesn't have to be triclopyr. Clopyralid, you can't use in residential, so triclopyr, fluroxypyr, but look for that PYR. Those pyridines can really help these herbicides translocate better through that plant and give you better control of difficult to control broadleaf weeds. And so as we look at the evolution of herbicide, especially in our portfolio, you see that we have those phenoxys, 2,4-D, MCPP, or MCPA, which is a phenoxy as well, and dicamba, but we've inserted one of those pyridines. And so for Escalate 2, it's fluroxypyr. Cool Power and Horsepower, it's triclopyr. And I mentioned that the difference between these two products is just the formulation and when you might be using one of these formulations over the other. And then you can see Quincept and many products like it. We've included quinclorac, where you get that synergistic control. And so as we see the evolution of herbicides, it's not surprising that we start adding these pyridines to the mixes. And then I'll reiterate that timing thing I said. We just looked at spring-timed applications, weren't great on ground ivy, and here's why. Because you can make that top growth curl and twist, and you see all the epinasty and again, mayhem. People like to see it, but what's going on below the ground? Very little. So after that 6-week period, that plant can just start pushing up new foliage. And this happens quite often with dandelions in the spring. In the fall, on the other hand, you don't see as much above ground death and mayhem because that herbicide's moving down to the root system, and that's where it's all happening, but you don't see it. And so you can go too late. You don't want to go too late. That's why I always try to tell people around October 4th or somewhere in October is usually a good timing. But you can get much better control, and they might not disappear before your eyes that fall, but you come back in the spring and all those weeds are gone. So difficult to control broadleaf weeds can include annuals as well, things like spurge, oxalis, purslane, knotweed. These weeds can be really difficult to control because remember I said that weeds have to be growing because the sugars move with that new growth wherever it is. These plants can produce foliage very quickly and then just stop growing altogether, and they just sit there. So they're not putting much energy into vegetation. They're just growing up very quickly. They'll sit there, bide their time, and then produce seeds and disseminate them. And so it's difficult to control these weeds with any herbicide really that needs to translocate. And so that's why it's always a good option to add one of these burn down or these PPO or protox inhibiting active ingredients, carfentrazone, sulfentrazone, pyriflufen, and flumioxazin, because they are contact driven. They contact the foliage, they disrupt the cell membrane, and they cause that foliage to just be burned down essentially. And so often for annuals, all you need to do is burn down that foliage because they haven't put energy into vegetation. They don't have stored sugars to push back new foliage. And so these burn down active ingredients can do two things. They can help burn down the foliage, and they can help break down thick waxy cuticles on these plants to help the other active ingredients in those products to get into the plant. So this is a site, pretty common site that you see early in the spring where you had maybe a snow plow that was too big for the sidewalk, and turf grass doesn't spontaneously regenerate in these areas, but you can see that this is prostrate knotweed. That's one of those annuals. There's prostrate knotweed surviving when you can see on the right, all the grasses are really going dormant in the summer. Yellow wood sorrel, a nasty annual that I see in landscape beds a lot as well, very opportunistic. Spurge, one that grows up. I see this in a lot of tree skirts, things like that, mulched. But this one's really difficult to control because it grows very quickly and stops growing. And so if we look at prostrate knotweed control, we have percent control on the far right column. This is 28 days after treatment. You see all these products, and we did all the common things. We looked for products that control pyridines. We added quinclorac to some of these products, and what we found, what did the best, was Speed Zone that has carfentrazone in it. And that PPO is really what drove those other active ingredients to get into this plant, and that PPO helped to break down that membrane on those plants all on its own. And so again, as we further look at this evolution of herbicides, we see PPOs being added to these. And so you see Speed Zone there with carfentrazone. You see Sure Power on the far right has both triclopyr and fluroxapyr, which we talked about for difficult to control weeds. And then we add flumioxazin. For Speed XT, again, triclopyr, and you add pyriflufen. So all of these PPOs aren't created equal. Flumioxazin is certainly a more high-powered PPO, and so you're going to see that visual effect much faster than any of the other ones. And we're going to time this one for the summer so that grasses and weeds alike have a thicker cuticle. And flumioxazin helps break through that cuticle and get those other active ingredients into that plant. Pyriflufen can do the same thing, but really early timed spring applications, these products can be useful in those times too. You'll see that sulfentrazone is also a PPO, and there's plenty of products that have added sulfentrazone to the mix. Here's Sure Power taking care of ground ivy. These were 3 different treatments along here at 3 different rates. It really didn't matter which rate. And this is late spring application. You see how quickly it just takes it all out. This is just 22 days after treatment. Summer application on ground ivy, again, 14 days after treatment, while the other 2 are maybe struggling a little bit. Sure Power does a great job in the summer taking out difficult to control weeds because of that PPO and because of those pyridine mix. And then this is yellow wood sorrel, really difficult spot when you have thin turf. Maybe you're just establishing, and you can see that yellow wood sorrel on this untreated plot in the top, just flourishing. and then Sure Power down at the bottom took it all out. And here's the data for that. 43 days after treatment, Sure Power is the one treatment that really continued to really kill that plant. Looks like we had some injury from some of the other treatments, but those plants were able to show grass in here, there was crabgrass in here, there was nut sedge, so annual grasses, nut sedge, and perennial plants, and you can see how well it has activity on all three of those different types of weeds. So Sure Power would be a timed premium herbicide in the middle of the summer, while some of these other premium herbicides would be timed early in the spring for 4-Speed XT and Cool Power. Escalade you could really use anytime, or later in the fall. Escalade, again, could be used anytime. And then just 4-Speed, I want to mention how we've been looking at this premium herbicide in a different way. We've looked at real early broadleaf weed applications. This one was April 25th in 2019 in Michigan. It was a real late year, so this was still very cold, very early for an application, and we compared it to other similar type products that have PPO, some that don't. This is for dandelion, and this is that trial. It's 57 days after treatment, and you can see 4-Speed XT providing excellent control of dandelion that far out, where some of the other products are struggling a little bit. Sure Power also, but this isn't the best timing for Sure Power. And so this is kind of how you start to separate some of these herbicides. So again, for these difficult to control broadleaf weeds, look for herbicides that contain these premium active ingredients. Improve that application timing, make a repeat application if necessary, add a surfactant, look for other issues like hard water. And then you can further tease apart these herbicides by looking at the labels. Change up can be used where on warm season grasses where other herbicides simply can't. Cue ball has a lot of options near seeding or after seeding, before seeding, and then at green up with warm season grasses. There's different herbicides that you may or may not want to use, but looking at the labels can help you make decisions as well. That's all I have for you. Again, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to email or call or contact your local Nufarm sales rep. Thanks.